merely possessing Crimea or Donbas, it doesn't fulfill his goals or his ambitions. Neither his goals in terms of changing the structure of world politics,
Hmm.
nor his goals in terms of rebuilding the Russian Empire.
So, and let me ask you, uh, the fall of Assad in Syria was a humiliation for Putin. Do you think it would lead him to take a harder line towards Ukraine and the terms of a possible peace?
So it's, of course, worth stepping back and asking why he's fighting in Ukraine as a way of answering that question.
Hmm.
He's made pretty clear many times over many years, actually, not just in the last 3 years, that he doesn't believe Ukraine is a real nation, that he wants to make it part of a Russian empire or a Russian sphere of influence. He's also had the goal in this war of, in his language, changing the world order, by which he means creating a world in which he can do whatever he wants. He enjoys the same kind of impunity around the world that he enjoys at home. And it's true that the war in Syria, the loss of Assad, does mean that his ability to achieve that bigger goal, this changing the way the world works goal, is pretty severely damaged. And so
Hmm.
that makes Ukraine really the last place where he can still do that. And I think he is now has, if you, he has even more, he has even more at stake in Ukraine. That doesn't mean that he's going to be more able to fight in Ukraine, because of course what Syria also shows is that Russia is growing weaker, that it's overextended, that its military supply system is limited, and that it doesn't have the men or the equipment that it had 3 years ago.
Yes. I mean, it will mean then, do you think, that if there is to be a deal, and we'll come to that, it has to be a deal for Putin that he can present as an unambiguous victory, which maybe means, at a minimum, possession, not just occupation, but possession of the territories that are now in Russian control, in the Donbas, in Crimea?
I don't think that's our problem. In other words, it's not up to us to know what it is that Putin can or cannot sell as a victory. As he's presented this war to the Russians and to the world so far, merely possessing Crimea or Donbas, it doesn't fulfill his goals or his ambitions. Neither his goals in terms of changing the structure of world politics,
Hmm.
nor his goals in terms of rebuilding the Russian Empire, nor, I
Yes.
should say, his goals in eliminating what he considers to be an illegal, or maybe illegal is the wrong word, or an illegitimate state. He doesn't respect Ukrainian sovereignty. He doesn't think Ukraine should
Right.
exist.
Right. So in that sense, he's setting the bar of attainment very high. What does that mean, though, in terms of the shape of a deal, if there's to be a deal, Anne?
So I am still mystified when people talk about a deal, because I have not heard anyone explain how the Russians will be persuaded to negotiate, or what deal they are interested in that is acceptable to anybody else. So far, all the things that they've said make it sound like the only deal they would accept is capitulation of Ukraine.
Hmm.
So I am still waiting for someone to explain why we're talking about a deal now and why we think it's possible. I mean, of course, Zelensky has said he would negotiate. He's said that for a long time, that he's presented several different versions of a peace plan, some publicly, some privately. He would probably be willing to at least temporarily, stop fighting for some territory in exchange for a NATO presence, or a European presence in Ukraine, in
Hmm.
exchange for some kind of real security. I think I'm within bounds by guessing that that's what he would accept. But
Hmm.
I have not heard anyone explain why the Russians would accept a deal of any kind. They have not said they would. They haven't given any public, or, as far as I know, private indications that they will. So what the Trump administration, which doesn't, of course, exist yet, but what it will do, what its plan is to get Putin to negotiate, I don't know. I haven't heard it.
Right. So, look, some of the ideas of what Donald Trump might do by way of exerting pressure on Putin have been aired publicly by people close to Donald Trump. And they come down, as far as I can see, to this. Trump would want talks. Without talks, if Putin is the one who stands back and refuses to engage, then the warning is, that a Donald Trump administration would arm Ukraine to the teeth, would give them all they need to fight Putin and to fight off Russian forces. That, I think, is the essence of the supposed Trump threat.
So that is not any different from what the Biden administration is doing right now. In other words, it's also directly in conflict with what other people around Trump have said. So J.D. Vance has said almost the opposite of that, that we need to stop arming them right now. Donald Trump Jr. has described, Zelensky as a kind of welfare addict, whose money needs to be cut off.
Mm.
I don't know who speaks for the Trump administration right now. I don't know who's creating this plan. And I would just caution everybody to be very, very careful. Right now, there is no plan. Right now, there is no Russian agreement. Right now, there is no evidence of anything really of
Right.
anything resembling a plan. And people are now jumping way ahead to think about, 6 steps down the road, what we should do. But the
Yes.
main question is, the Russians need to stop fighting. They need to understand that they've lost the war, that they cannot conquer all of Ukraine, that they will not have a pro-Russian government in Kiev, that they will not divide up Western Ukraine with other countries. That none of that is going to happen. Once they understand that, then we can have a negotiation. I have not yet seen evidence that they understand that. I'm
Well,
still
indeed. Yeah, there's absolutely no evidence that Vladimir Putin accepts that as a summation of where we are. But you say that the idea of further arming Ukraine would just keep us exactly where we are. There is, this perception now, and it's not unfounded, that the supporters of Ukraine are, well, some becoming rather war weary. There's more talk about on the European side, an assumption that the peace talks will happen this year. And even aside from that, the supplies for Ukraine, it is now suggested, are not inexhaustible. That the powers of NATO on the Western side, including Britain, are already stretched. Something has to give, and they're looking to a Trump presidency to be a turning point. That seems to be a common assumption.
I think that's it's very dangerous. Trump himself knows very little about the conflict. He hasn't confronted any of the real issues. He's very interested in having it be over and done with, and he's made that clear in several conversations he's had with European leaders. He doesn't seem to have a plan, and I think betting on him coming up with one is risky. I mean, that doesn't mean that Putin, for some reasons of his own, might want to have a ceasefire or that something might happen, but right at this exact moment, as we're speaking on December the 12th, there is no evidence of any plan at all.
Yeah, I mean, I would mention one further thing discussed in Brussels over the last 48 hours: the possibility of seizing those frozen Russian assets that are held in Western and European financial institutions, amounting to maybe £300 billion at the moment. Some of the profits from that are being skimmed off. It is argued that maybe just take it, maybe just seize it and use it and give it to Ukraine.
So I have been arguing that for a long time. I completely agree. That is one of the ways that we could go. It's true that we have already taken, we've used it's a complicated process by which we've used the interest from that money as backing for loans that we've given to Ukraine. It's some tens of billions of dollars. I saw a figure of 50. Maybe it's a little bit different from that. I don't want to be wrong. But it's a lot of money, and it will go to propping up the Ukrainian budget and keeping the state running and so on. So it's not nothing. But yes, absolutely, the $300 billion or 300 billion euros, I think it is absolutely something we should now consider. Taking permanently, using it to buy weapons and using it to win the war. I've thought that for a long time. I mean, there were some doubts about it in that. People are worried about the precedents and so on, but we're coming to the point of emergency. In other words, we're going to need to keep supporting Ukraine if we don't want, some kind of Ukrainian collapse or some kind of disaster, which would then create a more expensive problem for us. I mean, this is what I think is also really important for people to understand. If Ukraine were to lose, we would not save money.
Yes.
It would not be cheaper. A war ending with the Russian conquest of Ukraine would create a whole series of other disasters. Refugees, economic problems, political problems plus a brand new military problem for Europe.
Mm.
And it is foolish to imagine that ending the war in that way would be good for anybody. I mean, least of all, of course, the Ukrainians, who would then be subject to a regime not unlike the one that we've just seen fall in Syria, where people are arrested arbitrarily, they're kept in dark prisons, they're disappeared, they're tortured. That's what happens on the territory of occupied Ukraine now. That's what's happening right now in the eastern Ukrainian territories taken in 2022.
Yeah.
And that's what would happen to the whole state. And that would be a crisis of a different kind.
Yeah, and you make a very powerful case. In some ways, this is maybe an unfair question, and taking completely aboard your argument that there is generally a distance between what Donald Trump says and what Donald Trump means, and maybe a further distance between all of that and what actually happens. But when you close your eyes and just imagine, what do you imagine is going to happen in this coming year where Ukraine is concerned? And I realize sometimes the answer to a question like that is, I haven't got a clue.
I just don't like imagining. Sorry, I don't like guessing. I'm only telling you what I see now.
Yeah.
And what I see now is that there's a very, very steep learning curve that both Trump and first of all, Trump will have to decide from among the many different voices around him who are saying completely different things, almost opposite things. He will have to decide which one of those voices is the one he wants to listen to. So that's the first thing. Secondly, he will have to decide, whether he wants, what his level of investment in this issue is, which is probably going to be the most difficult thing he has to face immediately. I mean, there'll be other crises down the road. I have no idea whether he's thinking about it now, whether he's working on it, whether he's made any move in the direction of giving himself a greater understanding of the issues or not. I do know that he's spoken to several European leaders about it. And there are two things that we know. One is that he wants it off his plate. He doesn't want to think about it. He doesn't care about this issue. He wants it to go away, which is, of course, really foolish because it's not going to go away by itself. But secondly, we know that he's afraid of some kind of catastrophe scenario that would then make him look bad. So he's worried about what he will look like. And so we know those two things about him. Other than that, I really think it's important for people to kind of step back and understand that we don't have any idea what he'll do. He doesn't think strategically in the way that other people do. He doesn't have a goal that he wants to achieve. What he wants is for the story to disappear from the newspapers, and he doesn't have a strategy to get there. So let's wait and see whose advice he decides to take.
Anne Applebaum, good to talk to you. Thank you so much.